can grab a seat and you can sit. As a teacher, I always like to see who sits in the front. I had a feeling you were front seater. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for being here. Really means a lot to me. This book was a labor of love, but I'm so happy that I did it. And thank you for supporting it. And over the next half an hour or so, I want to have a conversation with you. This won't be a lecture. So if you're expecting a lecture, take that out of your mind. But through our conversation, I'm hoping that you can get to the heart of this and what I'm trying to do. Okay? So, thank you, Stephanie. All right. So, I would say for the better part, I teach at Loyola University, for those who may not know. And for the better part of my academic career, I have been interested in the way stories shape who we are. And when I say stories, I'm inviting you to think broadly. There's obviously stories that we read in literature, in books, that we listen to. Those stories are important and they have their place. But I'm even more interested in the stories that we live, the stories that we believe, the stories that we hold in head and heart, even if they are voiced and form. I believe that we are shaped by story, and who we are and who we understand ourselves to be is shaped by story. So let me give you a story. Many of you may have heard a few years ago I preached here, and I gave a story from my island of St. Lucia. Who remembers that story? Do you mind if I share it again? All right. I'm sure a lot haven't heard it. So I'm from the island of St. Lucia. I don't say the small island. That's typically how people call it, the small island. But I say the island, because I think when we say small, it says insignificant. And I'm hoping that you would see it's not insignificant. So I'm from the island of St. Lucia. I grew up in a family of 8 kids. My mom, my dad, and the 8 of us. So we had a big family in a small house. We had a happy household. And I'm the last. They called me postscript. I like to say they tried 8 times and then achieved perfection. But the story I shared then that I'd like to share with you now tells a little bit about my family. We played hide and seek. And we all know hide and seek, right? Yeah. There was one seeker, and all 7 of us, the rest of the 7 kids, went hiding, and one was seeking. And one at a time, the seeker found our siblings. So including myself, I was discovered. I didn't have a very good hiding place. I was about 8 years old, so it's a distant memory. But I was found. And one after the other, that happened until there was one sibling left, Kenneth, who is my eldest brother. At that time, he was in his early 20s. And we couldn't find him. So all 7 of us were looking, and we still couldn't find him. You know, and we looked outside, he wasn't there. He was not supposed to be outside, but we still looked outside. He wasn't there. We looked under the beds, wasn't there. The closets, wasn't there. Anywhere that we could find him, he was not there. Finally, in desperation, we go into the kitchen. My mom is at the kitchen sink, and she is washing the dishes. She has her back turned to us. We say, "Mom, have you seen Hedith?" She shakes her head, and we move on. And still couldn't find him. So then, at the end, we just said, okay, we've done, you've won, Henneth, come out where you are. And I think you can guess where he was. Yeah, he had gone into my mom's bedroom and he had put on her dress and he had tied his head. And he stood where she should be at the kitchen sink washing the dishes. Back then I said, I talked about hiding in plain sight and all that sort of stuff. Don't want to talk about hiding in plain sight, but I do want to say that to me, the unsung hero in that story is my mother. Because where was she? I think she had the best hiding place. And she disappeared. So thinking back, I would imagine she went to the neighbor's house or something. But we couldn't find her. So she was the unsung hero of that story. I bring my mother because in many ways I stand here because of her. My mom grew up in the countryside of St. Lucia and very, very humble beginnings. And she was in elementary school. And when she was 11, as all 11-year-olds do on the island of St. Lucia, you sit this common exam. It's called the Common Entrance Exam. And all 11-year-olds on the island have to sit it. And depending on how well you do, you get to go to the high school of your choice, right? Or you don't go to high school at all. So it's a high stakes, high pressure exam. So my mom turned 11. Unfortunately, there was an entrance fee for that exam. And her mom couldn't afford it. So she ran the risk of not being able to sit the exam. But all the teachers in her school got together and they went to my mom and said, we will offer to pay because your daughter is such a good student and it would be a waste to see her not going to high school. Mm-hmm. So my mom said yes, my grandma said yes. She's a very proud woman, so saying yes, I'm sure was a stretch, but she said yes. And the teachers put their money together and they paid for my mom. And she sat the exam. About a week later, the results come out and it's publicized in the national newspaper. Right? Like my results were publicized in the national newspaper. My mom topped the island. Wow. She has the highest grade in the entire island. So obviously that's a form of pride right there. And I only learned this story, I think it's maybe a couple of months now. She never shared it. And the reason she never shared it was because after she topped the island, her mother still did not have the money to send her to high school. So she ended up not going to high school. So she's 11 years old and she can't go to high school. She's topped the island, so the elementary school has nothing else to teach her. So they asked her to teach. So at 11 years old, she taught in the elementary school. I think she taught math. Can't remember what else. And that's who my mom is. And like I said, my mom shared this story with us a few months ago, and I was floored. I was on many levels. There were so many emotions involved in there, as you could imagine. But it helped me to understand who I was and the values that she taught. See, my mom always taught us to trust in God and to do your best, whatever the circumstances. And I could see where she got that from. At 11 years old, she was teaching. And in time, a young police officer came to a village and he heard her singing. She was singing a Jim Reeves song. Do you know Jim Reeves? Jim Reeves is a country and western artiste. He also sings Christian country and western songs. Fun fact, country and western, or country music, is very big on the island of St. Lucia. That's a side story, I can tell you that. A young police officer from the city came to the countryside, was stationed there, and he heard her singing the song Whispering by Jim Reeves. And he fell in love with her. And I'm here because of that. So I share that story to say that to me, my mom is the inspiration for much of who I am today and what I do. Her story helps me understand who she is, but also helps me understand who I am, and is part of my story. So we all stand on someone's shoulders. Someone has inspired us, someone's story, who's loved us, who's held us. There's someone in our lives who's done that to us, for us. And their stories are important, and they're important for our lives. So the first question I have for you, I promise this was not a lecture, it's a conversation. Whose story, whose shoulders are you standing on today? Whose story brings you to this and this point of your lives? Please turn to someone around you and share. If you don't want to share to the person next to you, because you always share with them, I can share it. Try. All right. I invite you to wrap up your conversation with your last few thoughts. Okay. All right, let's come back. Thank you. Next time I need a little bit of class time or something. Yeah. All right, so in honor of the story that you just shared, I invite you maybe just say a word, maybe the name of someone that you shared about. So I just invite you to put that out to the atmosphere. Anyone? Pop Einstein. Your mom. Yes. Yes. It would be my mother, Ruth Ann Zimmerman. Ruth Ann Zimmerman. Yes. Anyone else? My grandmother. Grandmother. Yeah. My father and my choir master when I was in childcare. David. Grandmother. Anyone else? My father. Your father. My dad. My grandmother, Frances Ellis. Frances Ellis, yes. My mom. Oh, your mom. Yeah. My mom, who went by Dodo. Yeah. Anyone else? Thank you for that. Grandma. Because it's different, I'm just going to put them all. Yeah. Yeah. So one of the reasons I wrote this book is because I wanted to name that so that we can reflect on it how important stories are to our lives. You know, like I said before, they form who we are, our identity. They are central to us. But they're not only central to us as persons, they're also central to the way in which we understand our world and our communities. I want to share another story with you. Later on in my life, after I finished with some of my studies, I say some of my studies, I moved to the island of St. Kitts. And guess who I met on the island?
Was she singing?
No, she was not singing. But I raised that. I mentioned that because moving to the island of St. Kitts was obviously very new for me, and I didn't know the people. But in time, I settled down and got to know some beautiful folk. And there's one person that I know you will be surprised that I mentioned this, and Wendy's mom is here. Thank you. There was one person that came back to me very, very clearly, and her name was Rose. And she only came back clearly to me because Wendy's mom, when she's visited her, when she first arrived, she started speaking with Rose again, and Rose, told me hello, and we reconnected. But I mentioned her, and she came back to me because she was one of those that I'll never forget, showed some great hospitality on a Sunday, or was it a Saturday? One of them. As a bachelor, when I'm hungry and there's nothing in the cupboard except cornflakes, I could always count that I could call on Rose and she would have something cooked and ready to eat. And I'll drive over to her, and most of the time she had a pot of cook up, something we call cook up, just this amazing dish of rice and chicken and salted cod and other lovely things, all stewed together and simmered with love. And she would make this massive pot cook up. And then I would always count that I could get some for her. And inevitably, before I was leaving, she said, "Hey, come back, come back." And then she would open the freezer, and then she would take out something called a sucker, right? Which is a cup filled with milk and essence and coconuts and all sorts of things and sugar and frozen. It's like a frozen treat. And she would give me some. And I would leave with a smile on my face. And I mentioned Rose because she epitomized for me community and the love and the concern that community has and should hold for each other. And recently, as I mentioned, when we reconnected to Wendy's mom, I asked her, "How are you doing?" And she shared that she had struggled through a few surgeries and illnesses. And then she said, "But I am standing on the promises." And that struck me. I didn't say it to her, but it struck me. I'm standing on the promises. And the reason it struck me is because I had heard something similar from my mom and from many others in my life. What she meant, she was standing on the promises of God. That despite the difficulties in her life, she trusted the promises that God had given. And my mom says that all the time. She said, I would say, "Mom, I'll come visit you tomorrow." She will say, "If God spare," right? If it's in God's will that you do that. There is this wisdom that I have received from the persons who I grew up with and who nurtured me, that God is present in our lives, that God is there. Regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the difficulties, God is there. That is the story of community that I grew up with. I want to show you an image. I may have showed you this image before. It's in a church in a village. I reproduced that image in the book. It's in a village of Jack Mills and Lucia. It's a mural. It's about the size of maybe twice this wall, maybe. Right? It's fairly large. Like this is the altar. You can't really see it, but the altar is here.
Wow.
Right? The altar is about here. And the artist Dunson Santoma painted this as his interpretation of the St. Lucian story. And I would put to you the Caribbean story. Right? So I don't know what you see. Maybe you can tell me what you see. What's the obvious things that you see? Anyone?
Mary and Jesus.
Yeah, Mary and a baby Jesus, right? Yeah. What else do you see? Please say Joseph.
A dove coming down.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit, right?
That's the person with the banana.
Yes, a banana farmer. Right here.
Lots of non-biblical figures.
Lots of non-biblical figures in a setting that's typically for biblical figures or religious figures. Thank you, Richard. Yeah.
Did you see workers?
You see workers.
Workers of different ethnicities.
Workers of different ethnicities. Yes, yes, yes.
Buildings.
Buildings. Like here, right?
Over on the right?
Sorry.
Those buildings on the right.
Buildings, a church. Yeah.
A ship.
Nature. Yeah, mountains. The pitons. If you ever visit St. Lucia, that's our iconic landscape. The sea. The sky. Anything else?
Candles.
Candles. That's from the altar. That's not on the mural. Oh, it looks like it's on the mural. That's the altar.
The indigenous gentleman that he talked about.
Yes, indigenous. Your left. This is actually a singer, right? Called a chatouel, and it's the chatouel is like the lead singer who calls the village out for celebration. All right, so it's a very indigenous. It's part of our heritage. This is a fisherman, and this is someone who is heralding the return of the fisherman with blowing a conch shell. Right.
There's a couple dancing in the left.
Yes, now I need to tell you about this dance because this dance is called the debot, and it's very sensual. I think I went down in my voice when I said that. There's a lot of hip movements in that dance. So sensual that the Catholic Church threatened to excommunicate anyone who did that dance.
Oh.
So what did this artist do?
Church.
He put it in the church, right?
And is this a Catholic church?
It is a Catholic church. I don't know if that's significant, but yes, it is a Catholic church. Anything else?
Does he have clothes on? I mean, it's really.
But it's sensual, so I anything goes. Anything goes. At least he doesn't have a shirt.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
What does the fellow in the lower left have in his hands?
Yeah, that's what I was
A
asking.
shack, what we call a shack or a shaker. It's filled with beads, and you shake it,
It's like a
and it's part of the percussion.
Board.
Percussion. Yeah, as well as my favorite, the drummer. The drummer.
It looks like the baby Jesus in the middle is holding up a communion host.
Yeah. Thank you, TJ. The baby Jesus is holding the Eucharist. But the placement is very instructive because the placement is right at the heart of Mary. Right? I don't know if anyone can see that.
There's like a seat.
Right?
that-
Yeah. So this is the Eucharist. I'm sure I don't know how to use the pointer on
That's
this,
all right.
but maybe you can show me. This is the Eucharist, and it's right in Mary's, Right, where our heart would be.
You'll have to buy the book to get close.
So we're closer to you. Thank you, Darren.
There's
All right.
indigenous woman for the baby, is that?
Yes, right here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the story that's been narrated here is one of God's presence in the everyday life of people. In the farmer, in Rose who cooks, right? In the dancer, in the cultural icons, in the landscape, right? It's all part, right? We are all icons of God's presence, right? And the light, you know, if you can imagine, they're almost ripples of light that are coming out from the center. So it's like each part of this image is being illuminated by the Eucharist and by what's happening in the center. Right? So that's the deeper story that this artist is trying to communicate. That our story is one of God's presence among us in the very humble things that we do. So, second question to you. If you were to imagine Europe right here in Christ Church, what would it include? What are the important parts of our stories that you would want to represent on that Europe? Hard question, right? So instead of turning to the person, form small groups, 4 or 5, and just talk about that for about 3 minutes. What would you see as important on a All right. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for that fun. Any ideas?
We were discussing some way to portray the great music of the world. Not necessarily religious music, but the great music that we've had for centuries handed down on the basis that it's wonderful itself. But what the music is a great unifier.
Yeah.
And boy, we need that.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
We're talking about various different things you put around it, but so if there was a way to portray it, how it all supports each other.
Yeah.
So whether it is congregation, rummage, or other forms of outreach, or youth, music, or each thing, but whether you have it something in the middle, or whether you're able to portray it in a way so it's sort of like all supporting, everything sort of weaves together so that there's sort of this integrated sort of strength to it. Pastoral care, all those different elements coming together form in terms of all the other images and how you would portray it.
Yeah, tapestry of the ministry. What else?
I would put representations of people from many ethnic backgrounds to remind us that we have one than what separates us.
Yeah. Showing something of the wide and long the history of Vanessa, you might find all of that. Yeah. Yes.
We were talking about some of the images that we might use. So we might use some of the candles from Tizay, might use something from the lake service baptizing people in the lake. We might use the churchyard, pieces of, one of the stained glass windows, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was thinking way back with the founding of Winnetka, how it was a swamp and there were crows and we had co-ed and so on. So something that shows how it used to be.
How it used to be. Yeah. Like story through time, right?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So one of the reasons I wrote this book again was to help us to reflect on how important stories are to us Again, not personal, not simply personal stories, but the stories of us as a community, stories we share together. Because that's what we are really doing. We're sharing a story. We're almost building a story together. Right? We are laying different characters and different events. We are part of it. So that's one of the reasons I wrote this book. But I also wrote it, as the title suggests, to show that sometimes that convictional power story, the way it shapes who we are, and the way we can so strongly believe in that story, right, has a shadow side. That we can so strongly believe in stories that sometimes it hides the actual reality that's out there, right? That the story blinds us. We are held in its conviction, we are held in its throes, and we lose sight of the wider reality. I mentioned this image. This is a response to other images in the early 1960s and before. This is the cathedral in St. Lucia. It's what's called a minor basilica. So it's an important church in the Catholic Church. And if you would remember what the artiste was previously trying to communicate, now compare it to, you can't really see it. I don't think I have I don't have but this is the ceiling of the cathedral. And on the ceiling are ancient paintings of saints, right? That are on the wall. And I remember
From the island or?
No.
No.
No, all of them are European saints,
Oh.
right? And I remember as a kid growing up and looking up at this all the time and wondering, who are these really stoic, serious people who think who are these stoic, serious people? And I learned these were the saints, and they had a halo in their head, over their head. But that was my idea of sainthood. This is, don't understand too much, the artist's idea of sainthood. The common people, the everyday life, and that's the story, that he wanted to communicate, and not the other one. My mom tells us when she grew up, we were a British colony, that is, we were ruled by England, and she was taught, and this is a pretty horrid story. She was given a creation story. You know how God in Genesis created the earth in 7 days? The creation story she received was that when God created the earth, God created all the peoples, and God created a big body of water, great sea. And God invited each of the people to bathe in the sea, to wash off the mud, because they had all been created from the dirt, right? To cleanse themselves in the great sea. And people by people did it until a few were left back. But by the time they got to the sea to cleanse themselves, the sea was so muddied from all of the dirt that was in there that they couldn't be clean. And these were solutions. Black people. That's the story that she was told. So I mentioned that to you, it's horrid, but to say that stories could be powerfully wounding in that way. I believe that the primary struggle of our time is one of narrative. It's a narrative struggle. It's a struggle about the stories that we tell about who we are and about who the others in our society is. And I'll advance it a bit. When I started writing that book, Wadi Al-Fayumi was a 6-year-old from in Illinois, one of those southwestern suburbs.
Plainfield?
Plainfield.
Okay.
You may have heard that story. That was 2023, right? That was when the conflict between Israel and Palestine had just begun.
Yeah.
And his landlord,
Yeah.
who was so, I guess, inundated by the news, right, of what was happening, and believed, therefore, that all Muslims and all Palestinians were here to do harm to us in the United States, had enough and walked into Wadi's and his mom's house and murdered him and harmed his mother severely. So that was one of the reasons that I wrote this book, because I was so disturbed by the way in which we could listen to a story and believe it so intently that we could do harm to a 6-year-old and ignore the reality of the person that's in front of us, that this is not a terrorist, right? This is a 6-year-old. It's tragic. But I wanted to write that book to bring it to our attention, because we tell ourselves stories all the time that, in this case, cause physical harm. Sometimes may not cause violence or physical harm, but still wound, because we caricature who others are. And I'll give you just a couple examples and then we'll wrap it up. These are what I call deep stories. They are stories about who we are and who the other is. And we live them. They may not be based on facts, but they feel true. Just like the landlord felt that that was true. And I give you a couple here. Who immigrants are, who the incarcerated are, right? Who people on welfare and assistance programs are. We may not hold these in this room, but these stories are held in this home, and they cause tremendous harm. So that's the second reason I wrote that book, to bring that to our attention, because I believe the primary struggle for today is a narrative struggle. And I wrote this book to try to give us, not only bring that to our attention, but to give us ways, as however humbly as I could, to get out of this. The fact that stories move. Last thought. How do we get out of this? When I was writing the book, the parable of the Good Samaritan came back to me very, very clearly. We know the story, so I won't go into the story very much, but I do want to highlight some things. So we know the story of the Good Samaritan that Jesus told. Right? One day a man is walking from Jericho to Jerusalem. Jerusalem to Jericho.
He's walking.
From Jerusalem to Jericho.
He's walking.
He's walking. I'm the bad picture, but he's walking through countryside like this, dry, arid country. It's an 18-mile stretch. He's going up from Jerusalem, which is at to 1,500 feet above sea level, to Jericho, which is like 700 feet below sea level. So he's going downhill, right? And he's going through desert country. And we know the story. He falls into robbers. They beat him, strip him, take everything he has, and left him. A priest walks by on the other side of the road and walks. A Levite comes by on the other side of the road, sees the man, and walks. And then a Samaritan comes and sees the man. And I want to pause there, because that's the first shock in the story for whoever would have been listening to it, as we know. Because Samaritans were enemies, or the Samaritans and the Jews at that time were enmity. So the fact that Jesus threw in a Samaritan there, right, is the first interesting thing. But the Samaritan walks by on the other side of the road, and then he stops and he looks. And I read this scripture over and over and over again. It's so deliberate. He stopped and he saw the man. Then he went over across the road. He crossed the road to take a better look. And then he knelt down and he poured oil and wine on the man's wounds. Then he put him on his beast of burden say a donkey. He took him to an inn in a nearby town. And then it says, the next day, which means he cared for him through the night. Let's go back to the picture. He cared for him through the night. And then he paid the innkeeper, as we know, right? What, 2 denarii, right? To keep up his care with the promise that he would return. And I imagine 2 denarii is like, what, 2 days' wages? And I imagine that this probably was a day laborer. And that's all he had on him. And he probably went to make some more money so that he could return and pay for the continued, right? So it's the beyond, the gratuitous care that strikes us in this. But for me, writing this book, what struck me is the fact that this was a Samaritan, right? Who, if he believed the narratives of his day, should never have stopped to encounter this person on the side of the road. If he believed the narratives that this person who may have been a Jew was his enemy, and he should not have stopped, that he did. Right? So that's one of the messages, the wisdom from the Good Samaritan that I tried to tease out in this book. That is the primary challenge facing us is a narrative struggle. Then one of the ways that we can address that, right, is to find ways to cross the road, to encounter the other that we story in harmful ways. And true encounter, true relationships, that we don't settle for the stories that we tell and we live about who we are and who others are, but we are intentional about digging deeper. We're intentional about forming the types of relationship that expand our horizon and that helps us encounter stories that are different from ours. Stories that may challenge us, but are still very, very, very necessary for us to know. Because unless we do that, what is at risk is our community. It's our community. And I think I want to leave it at that. Questions, thoughts? David?
If something in a story is true, it's factual, it's not open to debate. I mean, every reasonable person would agree that it's factual. Can a factual story wound? Are you talking about factual stories? It seems to me this truth may wound, but how do you know not to tell the truth?
Yeah, that is a great question, David. I'm trying to think of an example. Can you think of an example of a factual story?
I'm thinking of situations where museums are being told to remove displays
Right.
that make people uncomfortable,
Right.
but that are still factual.
Yes.
And it sounds like what David is getting at is there are things in our past that may not fit the story we want to tell about ourselves, but they are part of our story.
Right.
Nonetheless, and we need to balance that who we want to become with who
Yes.
we've been,
Yeah.
and not pretend that it didn't happen.
Yes.
Am I right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can,
Yeah. And yesterday we had this lovely presentation from Michael Bosberg, with a one-man play that Cynthia and the others put on. And we talked about that sometimes we fear stories, we fear, stories that sometimes are true, like you're saying that, we fear our history, we fear encountering the things of our past. But we have to do that. Many other countries have done it. Germany has done it. And Germany obviously has a horrid story. But that's part of the challenge of a nation, right? Is to face the stories and fear, guilt, shame. That's all part of the process. You know, we have to find ways to work through that, just like Germany did, just like South Africa. But we fear those. We fear those true stories. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I thought I had a question. Richard, yeah.
So,
Thank you, David, and Dan.
I don't remember if you said it explicitly this time, but you said before that the story that is hurtful, the best way to counteract it is to replace it with another story.
Yeah.
Is that right? So
Yeah.
So the example of the museum presenting something in a factual way, that's an example of trying to replace maybe other stories that are
Yeah.
but the story won't necessarily go away.
Yeah.
I mean, which is where the conflict.
Yeah. Exactly. Thank you for that, Richard. Yeah. A lot of the times we think that the way to counter stories is to throw facts at it, right? And I don't think that that's totally effective. And thank you, Richard, for bringing that. Because one of the points I try to make is because stories are so convincing, sometimes the facts do not really matter, right? And the whole conversation about fact checking that often is an important one. We do need to fact check, but often it's not sufficient because stories are so deeply convincing. So I believe that to break the hold of a story like that, you know, like what we've been talking about, a story that might wound, you need another story that is equally convincing and equally and that's equally captivating. And oftentimes we have to live into that story. And you know, I know we don't have a lot of time to get into details, but yeah, Elizabeth.
Well, no, it's just, I remember you saying that, but because they about stories that involve our feelings that really strike the emotions. That's where the facts.
Yeah,
exactly. The same way.
I mean, think about the image that I put, the Jack Mill mural. Like, think about the stories that people were hearing about who they were. Think about my mom listening to that creation story. She's so deeply hurtful and wounded, but obviously segregates, right? To segregate. So the British at that time, we would have seen them as better than us, right? And we as lesser. And what? Sorry, Mary. Let me just finish that thought. And what was healing then was to construct a new story, which is what the Jack Mill that mural did. Is to construct a new story, not to throw facts at the British, right? But to build a new story that we could believe in, that God was with us, and that what we were doing and who we were was valuable and had dignity. Can I go Mary Jo back?
Well, where did that story come from? The church, from the Catholic Church, or did it just come from the?
I'm not too sure where she may have heard it. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I just remember you made the point that this was partly why, the reason why Jesus used parables. Like he knew that stories. We remember stories better.
Yes.
Just little acts.
Yes, like the Good Samaritan story. Yeah. How much time do we have?
Good. We have about 5-ish more minutes.
All right.
For folks who want to dive into this more and maybe read the book together, would there be an opportunity that you can think of for people to come together and do like?
If folks want to do like a book study,
That would be
then I'll be happy to lead that. Yeah, because I remember when I wrote this and it was published, I said, wait a minute, my thoughts are actually out there. That's a very humbling thing. But I would love persons. If you want to do it, I would be happy to. So that's just an invitation, and maybe TJ, you can.
I will suggest if you would like to participate in a book study, then there's a sign-up sheet that I'll leave up here, so you can. Yes.
So when people would want to do it, so that we can try to get the best time for these.
I think that would be part of it. I think the first part would be who wants to do it, and then when does it work? But yes. But if you want to participate in that, I invite you to write your name and your email address. And while you're writing that, you can also drop off your participant survey. Just FYI.
Thank you.
Thank you.